That's a closing speed of 80. 200 tons of commuter steel, thousands more in freight, and only a few hundred feet of track between them. Neither crew saw the other until it was far too late. The collision happened at 4:22 and 23 seconds. It was violent, immediate, over in seconds. The Metrolink locomotive slammed head-on into the lead Union Pacific engine. The force drove the Metrolink cab 52 feet into the first passenger car, telescoping it like an accordion crushed in reverse. Metal twisted. Cars buckled. Windows exploded. What had once been orderly rows of seats were now splintered frameworks buried beneath mangled steel. The sound was deafening, then gone, replaced by smoke, fire, screams. Passengers were thrown, some trapped beneath torn flooring and collapsed walls. Several cars lifted off the tracks, smashing into concrete and rock. People called out through shattered windows. Some managed to escape. Others couldn't move at all. A few never had a chance. Robert Sanchez was killed instantly in the cab. Many seated near the front of the passenger cars died in those first seconds. But for the injured, for the survivors, the nightmare had just begun. The first 911 call came almost immediately. I think a train just exploded. There are people screaming, bleeding. Some can't move. We need help, fast. Rescue teams arrived within minutes. Police, paramedics, firefighters, hazmat, even helicopters. Over 350 first responders would join the scene. But the damage was staggering, even for them. Some passengers were pinned between twisted rails and bench seats. Others were alive, barely, wedged under parts of the roof. Smoke filled the air. Blood soaked through the floor. Tools were brought in. Crowbars, saws, the jaws of life. Search dogs worked alongside firefighters. Bodies were lifted one by one from the wreckage. Some unconscious, some not moving at all. And the sun began to fall behind the canyon walls, casting long shadows over the wreck site. The smell of diesel, the hiss of ruptured brake lines, the weight of silence between cries for help. By morning, the numbers were clear. 25 people were dead, over 135 injured. It was the deadliest train crash in California in 50 years. And the question began to form almost immediately. How? Dispatch records were pulled, black boxes recovered, crew phones examined. The conclusion came quickly, and it was painfully simple. Metrolink Train 111 ran a red signal. It entered the single-track segment without clearance. The Union Pacific freight had been cleared to proceed. It was exactly where it was supposed to be. The signal had worked. The dispatcher had followed procedure. There was no fog, no track failure, no mechanical defect. The system hadn't failed. A person had. Text logs confirmed that Robert Sanchez was using his phone throughout the trip. He had messaged several times during the journey. His final text was sent just 22 seconds before impact. There was no evasive action, no emergency brake, no warning given. He simply didn't see the signal or ignored it, and there was nothing in place to stop him. By the next day, newspapers across the country ran the same headline. Why wasn't there a system that could have stopped this? The grief was immediate. The anger came next. And in that canyon north of Chatsworth, surrounded by the twisted skeleton of a morning commute, a new kind of pressure began to build. Not from engines or steel, but from the families, the public, and those left asking, what now? In the days following the crash, the wreckage was cleared piece by piece. twisted steel, splintered wood, seat cushions soaked in blood. Each carriage peeled open like a crime scene, each recovery carefully logged. But as investigators sifted through the physical evidence, another layer of truth was already unfolding in silence. Buried inside two small, indestructible boxes. The black boxes, one from the Metrolink train, one from the freight, held everything. Speed, braking, radio transmissions, signal compliance. And the story they told was chilling. Metrolink Train 111 had passed a yellow approach signal. The next signal, solid red, had been working properly. There had been no brake application, no radio call for clearance, just a text. Then silence. Then impact. The freight train had been exactly where it was supposed to be. Its crew had no warning until the moment they saw headlights, too close to matter. The final ruling from the National Transportation Safety Board was blunt. The cause of the crash was the Metrolink train operator's failure to stop at a red signal due to distraction from text messaging. Robert Sanchez had been texting during duty hours. His final message, investigators confirmed, was sent 22 seconds before the crash. No attempt was made to stop the train. But that wasn't the end of it, because there was one more question. On a warm Friday afternoon in Los Angeles, hundreds of people boarded a commuter train, expecting nothing more than an ordinary ride home. But within the hour, that train would become the site of one of the deadliest rail disasters in California's modern history. All because one red light was ignored. And the person behind the controls was too distracted to see it. The date was September 12th, 2008. Just after 3:30 p.m., Metrolink Train 111 pulled out of Union Station, heading northwest toward the suburb of Moorpark. It was a route it had taken countless times before, winding through the San Fernando Valley before cutting through canyons and cliffs toward the edge of Ventura counties. The train was busy, but not unusually so. There were 225 people on board. Office workers wrapping up a long week, students heading home, a few retirees, a couple of tourists. It was the usual crowd for a late afternoon train in Southern California. The train itself was standard too. It was led by a single F59PH diesel locomotive, pushing 3 bi-level passenger coaches, each one capable of carrying over 150 riders. And at the very front, seated behind a panel of gauges, radios, and throttle levers, sat Robert Sanchez. He was 46 years old, quiet, polite, familiar with this line, a professional. But Sanchez had a habit, one that didn't raise many eyebrows at the time, but should have. He used his phone while operating the train, regularly. He sent texts to friends, colleagues, even rail fans, some of them teenagers, who liked to track trains as they passed. They'd ask him which locomotive he was driving, where he'd be, what signal he just cleared. And he'd answer, sometimes casually, sometimes often. As Train 111 rolled toward the community of Chatsworth, it passed through neighborhoods and low hills bathed in soft, late-day sun. At 4:13 p.m., it departed the Chatsworth station. That's when it reached a stretch of track that demanded full attention. Just a few miles ahead, the double track would narrow to one single stretch of steel, shared by trains going in both directions, controlled only by color light signals and dispatcher coordination. Heading the other way, already on that single track, was Union Pacific Freight Train LOF 65-12. A long, heavy train, 2 locomotives, and 17 loaded freight cars. It had already been cleared to pass through the corridor. That meant Train 111 should have held its position just south of the junction until the freight had cleared the line. But that's not what happened. The train passed a yellow signal, a warning that the next signal would be red. It was the kind of moment that should have made any operator reach for the brakes. Instead, the train kept moving. The red signal, the absolute stop, was up ahead. Working perfectly, clearly visible. Sanchez never responded to it. He didn't radio in, he didn't slow down, he didn't stop. Investigators would later confirm that at 4:22:01 p.m., just seconds before the crash, Sanchez sent a text to one of the young rail fans he frequently messaged. It was short, routine. He told them the number of the locomotive he was operating that day. Nothing dramatic, just another message, just another distraction. What happened next took less than half a minute. But here's what makes this story even harder to swallow. This disaster wasn't just tragic. It was preventable. Even if Sanchez missed the red signal, even if dispatch didn't catch the mistake in time, there was a system that could have saved everyone on board. A safety net, built for moments just like this. It's called Positive Train Control, or PTC. Using GPS, wireless signals, and onboard computers, PTC monitors trains in real time. If one runs a red light, if it's about to speed through a curve, or collide with another train, PTC steps in. It brakes automatically. It overrides human error. No permission, no reaction time, just action. But back in 2008, PTC wasn't on this line. It wasn't on most lines. It had been proposed, debated, delayed. Safety advocates had begged for it, but nothing had been done. And so, on that afternoon in Chatsworth, the only thing preventing a head-on collision was a red signal and a man who never saw it. The passengers sat unaware, some chatting, some reading, some nodding off in their seats. Outside, the sun dipped lower behind the hills. Inside the cab, silence. And just ahead, around a gentle curve, another train, coming straight for them, 4:22 p.m. Some passengers were leaning against the window, watching canyon walls blur by. Others scrolled through their phones, read the newspaper, dozed off in silence. In the front cab, Robert Sanchez had just hit send on his final text message. He never reached for the brake, never looked up, never saw what was coming. Just beyond a curve in the track, the Union Pacific freight train was rolling toward him. On that same single line, both trains were moving at about 40 miles per hour. Why wasn't there a system that could override that mistake? For years, rail experts had pushed for a safeguard, a technology called Positive Train Control, or PTC. It had been proposed, studied, even demonstrated. PTC could monitor train positions, signal status, and speed in real time. If a train ignored a red light, the system would activate the brakes, even if the operator didn't. But despite all the warnings, it had never been federally mandated. Cost, complexity, politics, delays. And now, because of that, 25 people were dead. Public outrage was swift. Victims' families held vigils, press conferences, and meetings with lawmakers. Some demanded resignations. Others simply wanted to know how their loved one's death had been so easily avoidable. In response, Congress acted quickly. Just 1 month after the crash, the Rail Safety Improvement Act of 2008 was passed into law. It required all major U.S. railroads to install positive train control systems on high-risk routes by 2015. The act marked a turning point in rail safety, not just for Metrolink, but nationwide. Metrolink itself became the first commuter rail agency in the country to install PTC across its entire system. Years later, Amtrak and other major freight and passenger lines followed suit. But the progress was slow. Deadlines were pushed. Costs climbed into the billions. And for many families, those delays were more than frustrating. They were insulting, because no system, no upgrade, could undo what had already been lost. The grief took different forms. Some families became activists. Others avoided the news altogether. One father, who lost his daughter in the crash, said in an interview, "Every time I hear a train horn now, I think of her. And I think about how easily this could have been stopped." The crash also exposed a lesser-known issue: the federal liability cap. Under a law passed in 1997, total damages for a rail disaster, no matter how severe, were capped at $200 million. That included all injury claims, wrongful death suits, and medical costs. In a crash with hundreds of victims and dozens of fatalities, that meant some families would never be fully compensated. Lawmakers eventually debated raising the cap. But at the time, many victims were forced to settle for less than they deserved. There are now memorials near the site of the crash, names etched into stone, flowers placed on anniversaries, a bench where survivors sometimes sit just to remember. 15 years later, the tracks are quiet again. The canyon is still. But the lessons from that day haven't faded. Not for the families, not for the rail industry, and not for anyone who's ever looked at a red light and thought, "Just this once, it'll be fine." If this story moved you, or if you believe tragedies like this should never be forgotten, consider subscribing for more in-depth documentaries like this one. Share your thoughts in the comments. Whether you work in rail, ride these trains, or just care about safety, every voice matters, and every lesson remembered brings us one step closer to making sure this never happens again.